Stephanie, I want to start with you. We had a nice little conversation back there. You have been driving trucks for 38 years?
Yes, ma'am.
Don't call me ma'am.
It sounds aging, doesn't it? We're too busy to get old.
Tell me what's changed the most dramatically from when you first started as a truck driver. I'm sorry, everybody.
So many things have changed over the decades. Our trailers have gotten longer. Has standardized the weight and length limits across the nation. Just in the past 10 years, I'd say technology has made our life easier and a little more difficult. Before, I go different places every single load, and I run all 48 states. And sometimes information is not the clearest. And so Google Maps and, just GPSs have been a tremendous help. You still have to research your route. You just don't take a truck anywhere. But with more trucks on the road and more product being shipped, we have a serious lack of safe parking. And that's what I was speaking to the mayor about downstairs. If it would really reduce your traffic in the morning and the evening if trucks had a place to come into in the evening. We want to be here. We want to get our rest here, because once we start our electronic log in the morning, we have exactly 14 hours to use that day. And so we don't want to get up at 5 a.m. and sit in traffic coming in. So if you had some safe places to park here inside where we could deliver all the goods that are necessary for business, because if it doesn't come in the dock door, you can't use it or sell it out the front door. It would seriously reduce traffic. It would make my life easier. It's all about me. So there've been a lot of changes, and of course the cell phones and being able to stay in touch, and the phone apps coming down the line are just fantastic. And I always ask the question, if you're from Atlanta, do you know where the truck stops are? No. You just think things magically appear. And we try to make it look like that. We do. We try to make it look like that. But, it's just things that people don't think about.
Are there many women truck drivers?
We are about 7% of the driving force. And by the way, trucking has always paid every driver exactly the same, no matter man, woman, no matter your sexual orientation, your color. It pays by the mile. If you have the skills to drive the truck and the dedication to come in and drive one and the safety record, you will have a job at exactly what everybody else makes. So we are about 7% of the driving force. Where we lose a lot of drivers is between 18 and 21. They graduate high school and they usually start other commitments, careers, families. And so when they can drive interstate at 21, we've lost them already. We get a lot of women who have raised their children and retired and said, bye-bye, I'm going trucking. And we'll hire you. We will hire you. There's a shortage right now of about 45,000 drivers.
So that's semi-retirement.
There you go. There you go, semi-retirement. Except you do have to get up and work.
I'm going to ask my colleagues to put the shot clock up so I know how much time I have, because I'll talk all day unless you give me a time when I have to get off the stage with these folks. Michael, I want to talk to you. You were active duty in the U.S. Army for 8 years, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you for your service, first of all.
You're welcome.
And now you have transitioned into computer science. Tell me how you made that transition.
Well, it wasn't necessarily a hard transition. I did finish my bachelor's degree in computer science at the University of Cincinnati before I joined the military. So when I was looking at the end of my commitments, when it was time to start thinking about life after the Army, I started looking at ways to kind of fix the gap in my resume. My work in the military wasn't related to the computing industry at all. And as we all know, skills in the computing industry become obsolete very, very quickly, and it's a challenge for even full-time professionals to stay current. So I started looking at ways to pursue education while I was still in the service, and then I stumbled across the Georgia Tech's new offering, the Online Masters of Computer Science program, called OMSCS for short. I know we're limited on time, so I'll avoid that mouthful from here on out. So I applied to OMSCS, and I spent 2 years in that program, and then shortly after finishing my commitment to the military, I started applying to jobs at the Georgia Tech Research Institute, and frankly, had I not pursued that educational opportunity and had an opportunity like that not presented itself that was flexible in terms of cost, location, and time, I likely would have had a much poorer outcome for my transition out of the military.
You mentioned how it's difficult to stay up on everything, and especially in computer science. How do you do it?
It's one thing that I learned in the military, and I'm forever thankful for. It's a skill that will serve the American worker in the future, and that is to constantly be ready to learn something new and to dive into a completely new field. We've seen huge and drastic changes in the landscape of the computing industry. Artificial intelligence is now a mainstream job and not something that's only being researched at the public universities in the United States and abroad. We've seen jobs like information technology become vocationalized, and we've seen wages drop. So we've seen a very diverse and almost a mirror of the American economy in general in the computing industry. So it's very important that you're prepared to essentially move up the ladder. It's no longer sufficient just to enter the computing industry. You now actually have to climb a ladder within that computing industry, both a technical and a professional ladder.
Zaria, if you go to the Juma website, there's a lovely picture of you and a quote that says, "I would not have a job if it was not for Juma."
Well, what I mean is they gave me a chance to prove to them that I'm the best employee there is out there. And I did, and that's where I'm at now as assistant manager.
And I should point out, you're an assistant manager and you're just 20 years old.
Yes.
Does that feel, yay, right? When you were in high school, you were going to high school, you were enrolled in the Logistics, Education, and Pathways program, and you were working. How did you balance all of that?
Well, when I was in high school, I had about 5 classes, and I did classes during the day. At night, I did the Georgia Tech Leap, and during the weekends, I worked. And Georgia Tech is basically what I did in high school. It was online, so it was very easy. One extra class wouldn't hurt. So.
I know grown people who are not that organized. Where did you learn those skills, those organization skills, or is that just something in you?
I would say yes.
It's in you?
There's something in me.
Okay. Pastor, hi. You worked for 25 years at Carrier Industries in Indianapolis, excuse me. I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked Stephanie. What's changed the most from when you first started your work to when you left?
Well, probably the biggest thing within the 25 years, when I first started out there at Carrier, I was the screw machine. I was the one who shot all the screws into the heat exchangers, and eventually they developed automation that basically took my job away, put it into an automated situation where I got moved to a different position, and all of the heat exchangers that I was putting together by hand were being put together through automation. So basically automation has improved the production, and our quality control became a different aspect at that point in time. It wasn't on-site, quality control right away. When the finished product was there, we had our quality people come in, and they would make sure that everything was where it's supposed to be, and we did it periodically too. And I always felt like I was an inspector at the same time if I was doing my job, regardless of what my job was to do. And that's why Carrier, I believe, set industry levels, industry records for quality and for production. Mm-hmm. So throughout those years, they've been very productive, and it kind of saddened me a little bit when we stood there one morning and they made the announcement that they were moving to Mexico. And the shock and awe of it was tremendous. There are people there with 35, 40 years thinking, you know, I need 5 more years to retire.
Yeah.
Well, at that point, I had already encouraged and taken advantage of what they call the Employee Scholar Program.
Explain to
Yeah.
people what that is.
Basically, while we were there working at Carrier, we were allowed to have a certain amount of time, if we enrolled, a certain amount of time off of work to study. And basically, we all had to be, that took advantage of the program, we all had to be basically what we would call part-time students. We couldn't enroll full-time. It would be too big of a workload. But I started in 2003 when they basically started the, okay, we're paying the school. And that was a great move by Carrier because a lot of people did take advantage of it. And it wasn't a reimbursement program where we had to put the money up front ourselves and then they reimburse us. They made it to where we could enroll, and there was a certain area of the corporation that took care of all of the credit hours that were given and how much each one, and they paid them directly. So we really didn't have to bother with a whole lot of that, but turn our grades in. But I took advantage of that. I started in 2003, and I graduated in 2010 with a bachelor's degree
Oh,
in
congratulations.
psychology. It was
job.
full paid for. So my hat's off to Carrier for that. They have supported my family for 25 years, and even though being a union worker, we took pride in our product, and they still do. I took the severance buyout. My wife and I prayed a lot about it. And the reason why is because not only was I ready to move on, but I was always one of those kids who never could sit still. So I jumped around Carrier. I went from being what they call a production associate B all the way to becoming a group leader and a press operator and a fab tech, and then a fab tech group leader. So, and I was also involved in the union, in the leadership there. So it was an awesome ride, and they're still paying for my master's degree right now.
Wow.
So that's an awesome deal, and you know, they put together for us, and plus it saved a younger person within that construct of them moving to Mexico.
Yeah.
It saved them the time and the job. You know, they don't have to go home and tell their wife, you know, I don't have a job anymore. You know.
Stephanie, is there any kind of reskilling training in your industry now to help bring in younger people, or at least to help people who already have been in the company for a long time, the way that Kipp was?
Not that I know of. I think trucking is just focused on constantly training and retraining us to be safer drivers.
Safer.
They do a lot of that. You know, we have required classes we have to take, and they do some fun things, like they have a skid pad where they actually put you in a skid. So, you know, it's all about safe driving.
Juma, Zaria, we talked downstairs about your big dreams. What is it that you hope to do long term?
Well, I want to be a crime scene investigator. And I know that I have to earn a bachelor's degree. I have to go to a police academy, enroll in a police academy. I have to maybe do a ride-along and get certified. And I know that they make around $45,000 a year. So I just like to investigate. And I want to help everybody out, so, you know.
You mentioned that to me, that part of what you want to do, and this sort of fits with the millennial profile, is you want to be able to help people. Tell us a little bit more about why you want to do that, and maybe reflect on the people who've helped you get where you are.
Well, I mean, there's one reason. There's no need to be selfish. I mean, give people a chance. You never know what they can do for you. And, I mean, you'll be really surprised.
You're all good. You're all good. Michael, you said something sort of interesting to me, and I hadn't really thought about it before you said to all of us, is that idea that computer science and the tech industry is starting to feel some of the same effects that Kipp just mentioned in manufacturing. Could you talk a little bit more about that and why you think that's happening?
Absolutely. So 30 years ago, if you got a degree in computer science, there are a lot of different fields you could go into, and a lot of those fields have changed. IT is, in particular, one of the most, I guess you would say, hard-hit sectors of the computer science industry. We saw it go from something that was being actively researched to something that became a commodity, something that was then in the early 2000s being outsourced by major companies. For example, I briefly worked at Procter & Gamble, and they had recently outsourced all their IT staff, which used to be in-house employees, to Hewlett-Packard. And since Hewlett-Packard has now outsourced those jobs to India, outsourced those jobs to other developing markets where the labor is cheaper and where technical barriers have been lifted. So that's one of the issues that we're seeing now with the vocationalization of some of these disciplines. Additionally, the same way that the American economy or the American educational system has seen the bar raised from the high school diploma to the four-year bachelor's degree as an entry-level educational milestone, we're now seeing that in some of the areas of computer science. For example, had I not completed my master's degree online through Georgia Tech, I likely would have been working in a job more closely associated with software development, something where it's now starting to become a commodity job in and of itself. We're seeing artificial intelligence build websites. We're seeing a lot of actual systems development being shipped overseas, so we're seeing those jobs move overseas. So now we're starting to see graduate level degrees become the new entry level, or not the new entry level, I'll say the new minimum milestone for jobs in research like the one that I have now. So when it comes to finding, I guess you could say, more interesting and more novel work in the field of the computing industry, the bar is rising rapidly.
And then there's also the issue of how you pay for all that education.
Absolutely. That's one of the things that has not been addressed by most online programs. It's one thing that Georgia Tech addressed. So they were probably the first and still remain the only program that has understood that your online student does not need things like access to the library, access to the gym, access to parking, or a dormitory to live in. So as a result, those fees are not paid by your online students, and it's now why you can obtain a master's degree for about $7,000 on the whole, as opposed to offerings from other top 10 universities like Stanford. They offer one, but I believe the cost was somewhere in the range of $65,000 to attend that school online. Wow. So had that been my only option, I clearly would have not pursued that while I was still in the military. So really, Georgia Tech has a unique offering, one that's transcended a lot of barriers, and it's really the only one that's is far-reaching. I believe by last count, there's an OMS student in each state in the union. There's about 108 countries represented in terms of where students are from, just about every time zone, so it's very difficult to go someplace in the world and not find somebody who's learning through Georgia Tech and continuing their education.
That was interesting. The thing that you two have in common is you took advantage of online education to move forward. Kipp, I want to ask you about something because everybody knows about Carrier, and when Donald Trump said he was going to help keep jobs in the United States, they ended up keeping, I believe, the gas furnace business and getting a $7 million tax incentive from the state. Those are the headlines. That's what we read. What was it like actually for people on the ground who worked in that company? What did that end up meaning for them in real life?
Well, the attitude was basically still almost rebellious in certain areas of the manufacturing force, because they knew that all of the jobs weren't going to be saved. They knew that there was only going to be a percentage of the jobs that would actually be saved, and they were just waiting, see who was going to get cut. I mean, it was one of those situations where,
Awful.
they came up, you've ever heard the song, "The Waiting's the Hardest Part"? You didn't know where you fit or where you were going to, if you were at this level, say at a group leader at the highest pay grade level or whatever, within that cut, and you wouldn't have the seniority to hold that position, you could be looking at a $3 to $4 an hour cut in your pay, which would affect your bills, which would affect your lifestyle. And so a lot of people were still kind of, should I go or should I stay? And I was at the point where, like I said, after a lot of prayer and discussion with my wife, that it was time for me to go. It was time for me to go and move on. And right now I'm still in contact with a lot of the people there. And
How are they feeling?
The sentiment is really, truthfully, the sentiment from myself to them, my empathy for them is like, hey, get ready. We don't know. You don't know. We didn't know this was going to happen. Honestly, the announcement came in the middle of a production day.
Wow.
At 11 o'clock, they called us all up to the front, and they had this big area where they called the gray area, the Green Mile, is what they call it, the greeting area for people coming into the plant. And they called us all up there, and we're all standing around, and all of a sudden, one of the CEOs from Carrier announced that they were moving to Mexico. And it was just like shock and awe. And somebody filmed that and put it on YouTube, and it went viral. And
For a reason, because people really related to it.
Yeah, and it was a big issue. I mean, there was over 1,200 jobs in that plant, and only 700 of them were allowed to stay. So you can see, there were people with 10 years seniority that were being laid off, and they had callback rights and all that. But in the meantime, what's paying the bills? And we talk about automation and robotics and all that coming in, and they were complaining about a lot of that because it took jobs away from humans, but at the same time, it was we knew it was happening. We saw it from 25 years ago to now.
You can read about it, but when it really happens to you, it's a different story. We're almost out of time, but I do want to ask Stephanie one more question. I'm going to ask you to speak for all American workers. If you had an opportunity to talk to the head of one of the companies that you work for, or at head of a company about the future of the American worker, as someone who's out there doing it every day, what would you want them to think about when they're making their next set of decisions?
Well, let me preface this by saying that I listen a lot to NPR as I'm driving. It's the greatest job in the world to listen to NPR all day with a cat sleeping on your lap. But and I listen a lot about happiness in the future, and people want to make a difference. If I had the CEO's ear, I said hire the best people possible, and then don't micromanage them. Give them guidelines and turn them loose. You'll never know what happens with the good ideas. And get feedback from the people actually doing the job to streamline procedure to save money. But people want to make a difference. Something that I'm looking kind of forward to is working 3 more years on the road. And don't get me wrong, I love driving. I don't like traffic. Right now I'm trying to balance between stress and boredom. So once in a while I get to pick and choose where I go, not often, and I always pick rural America, very truck friendly people. Not that you're not friendly here in the city, it's just getting here to see you. That's the problem. But one of the jobs that I'm looking forward to or possibly looking at, it would be a customer service position with my company, because I know what the driver needs to know to safely deliver and take care of the customer, because I've been to all of them. But when I go in and petition for this job, I also don't want to be told what to do, because I've been by myself for several decades, and I know best.
So you're saying CEOs should listen to their workers, support them, and then let them do their job.
Right. Listen to the workers, make them feel like they can make a difference. If I could come in and do customer service and make a difference, I'd be there. So,
Thank you all for sharing your stories. Really appreciate it.
thank you.